So Hope, we're going to talk about a hot topic. It's probably the bulk of what most of my listeners are dealing with, which is that stuck place. My audience, being high achievers, they typically marry women who have kind of similar go-getterness to them. I would say both the husband and the wife, settling for mediocre is not something either of them are interested in, right? So they're listening to a ton of the podcasts, they're listening to the books, they're doing the workbooks, they've been to intensives. But to your point, doing all the things sometimes isn't enough. When you're looking at a problem so dynamic and as unique as this one, there's a lot of factors at play. So I'm really curious, can you give us an overview the stuck couple comes to see you, or the guy primarily, right? Give us an overview of how you attack the stuckness. What's different about your approach?
That's a great question. Well, anyway, I'm glad to be here, Roland, and I appreciate you and your generous introduction of me and the work you're doing. So, I think most of the time men find my program because they've heard about it somewhere or their wife has heard about it somewhere. And the truth is that there's enough basic trust going on in the relationship, but it's not worth all this hard work, all this heartbreak, all this pain that the couple's been through trying to rebuild something better. And most of these men in this more advanced state of recovery, they've been doing a good job. They're not betraying their partners. They're maintaining honesty and they are walking in integrity, but it's not moving the needle. The trust remains at this kind of basic level. And these men are frustrated because they're well-intended and they're looking at me saying, tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. It's just that everything I try to do seems to backfire, seems to either maybe be held against me or not be the right thing. And so what I work with them on is that performance mode, because this is old programming. This is part of where a kind of process addiction often develops, is the need to be someone that isn't necessarily totally true to who you are, doesn't have a full range of emotional experience that they're allowed to show in front of other people. I think most men, are really socialized in modern culture to go off into the wilderness on their own, figure it out, come back all fixed up and keep going. And so, there's this need to find themselves. It's interesting. I always tell them, you're sexually coping somehow, and you get caught and you get in trouble for it. And the reason you were doing that is because, it helped trump the anxiety, or it helped you feel alive to some degree, or whatever reason you latched and attached to those behaviors. Once you get caught for it, now you're in crisis mode. And so you're going into repair work and therapy work and trying to stabilize crisis. But where along the way do you actually find the thing that brings contentment, that brings fulfillment? And so I believe that work is done by facing oneself. And I think that's where we can find deeper meaning, purpose. And most of the guys that I'm working with have kind of arrived to that point. They just don't necessarily know how to dig into it. Yeah,
we serve the same population. I call it burning the wick at both ends. I think, you can't just burn the wick at the undoing what screwed you up end, because there's always a plateau. There's always a plateau. And the way I articulate it is, we're not here to recover. We're here to be us. And so I think you can only recover so much. And then there's this, but what for? So I'm getting good for what? I'm recovering what was lost. And then when I get there, I found what was lost and what, right? And I think if you don't answer that question, I believe as humans, we are here to do that. We're not here to undo what was done to us and the things that screwed us up. We're here to actually be us. And so I do think there is a balance of burning the wick at both ends. I think if you just burn the wick at one, it's not enough. I think you have to figure out what you learned that's backfiring and slowing you down or causing issues. But I do also think you need to figure out, why is somebody like me here? What are my unique abilities? What are they designed to do? Who do they help? And then you start to now, to me, at least with my own recovery, when you see what your flaws, for lack of a better word, are holding you back from, I want them out of my life so I can be more me. Whereas before, it's like I'm getting him out of my life really because my therapist and wife and the psychology books are telling me to get out of my life. And I just don't, like I said, I don't think we're here to recover. We're here to be us. So I think when we tap into what being us looks like, that, you know, it opens up this, oh, it's not recovery anymore. It's in our group, we call it self-mastery. You know, oh, I'm going to master self, right? Whereas recovery comes with it. There's a finish line, there's an undoing. I don't know. It's not as exciting to undo, to get to a finish line that, you know, I never really, you know, I never wanted to recover from a sex addiction. That wasn't my life's goal. Right. So it's like when I find out what these flaws are holding me back from and the person I could be, that kind of kicks it into a higher notch. So I think you and I have a similar approach. Before we kind of dive into the ins and outs of that, what do you do? Like, so if they're going to tap into more of them, can you just give us a high level overview of what that looks like? How do you do that with these men?
Yeah. Well, I've noticed you ask good questions, the kind that are really existential, like, what are we doing all this for? And you're right, because a lot of times recovery itself is a box that's being checked because someone got caught. It may not have ever been of interest to get into recovery until being caught, right? And it shouldn't remain the focus. In other words, it should be carried out. The gains and recovery treasures that you find in that process should kind of be what moves you then into, you know, living at your potential. So what I do to help them figure that out is, you know, essentially ask, what are the complaints that my wife has and how am I resisting those things? What are things I'm avoiding? And then I also provide, you know, some templates and metrics for things to look for territory to excavate, because sometimes people are pretty lost, you know, and the truth is that I believe that men who have at one point been terrible husbands, you know, manipulative, deceptive, and betraying, can become so invested in honesty, integrity, and essentially being who it is that is their best version of self, that they become better partners than anyone out there because of that intentionality, because of the steady, steadfast focus on, you know, correcting these areas of, you know, either deficit, like they weren't taught appropriately, it wasn't modeled for them or nurtured in them, or they've just, you know, made very entitled decisions, self-serving, self-protective decisions. I tend to see most of this stuff old, like it comes on board for certain reasons that may actually be helpful early on, but it outlives its value, especially when they're in an altruistic peer relationship with a partner that they're telling, you know, they're willing to lay their life down, even though they're not doing that. So we begin by asking some of those tough questions, the ones, you know, that we can't be afraid of, like, what is the point of existence? And while I'm not meandering through that with all of my clients or all the members in my program, because everyone kind of comes from different backgrounds and religious upbringings and faiths and things, I'm posing it to them for their work, their individual work with their therapists in their workbooks. They are really examining, you know, what is the purpose of waking up in the morning and doing things right? And am I too stoic? Do I think things are meaningless? Especially if I'm not making progress. And I feel like I should be earning more softness from my wife, or more kindness, or even just basic respect from her, given all my newfound trustworthiness and good positive attitude. But it's still not rendering any good outputs. And so I'm frustrated and I'm wondering if I need to boundary up with her. And so we're sorting through a lot of that confusion and charting a path toward wholeness that really is really meaningful.
I find, you know, to me, when I got into recovery, what I found was interesting. You know, most of the psychological work I have done has been around, kind of revolved around, what do we know about why humans are here? What do we know about why humans operate? What I found a bit frustrating with recovery was there was this emphasis on, I don't know, man-made stuff, like man-made ideals, man-made expectations, a lot of just, hey, this is how we've decided culturally. And what I find is your body doesn't care about man-made concepts. Your body cares about what your body cares about. And so to me, when you take this different approach around, hey, let's just focus on being you and why you're here. And let's what I find is it's actually not that hard to comply with a lot of the ideals that we've set up in this country. Is a lot of them are rooted in a good place. They're not looking at pornography is actually something that's just healthy. I mean, just objectifying a person's just not a healthy habit. And I think when we start really honoring what people what our bodies really care about, you start to treat people better. I found, rather than like focusing on the ideals, it's hard to get excited about that. But when you really try to talk about showing up in this really meaningful, awesome way, you just naturally start honoring the humanity in others. I think, to me, the thing that I've noticed with a lot of this, for at least our population, is dehumanization. In order to put yourself through the capitalistic grind, you really need to turn yourself into a production machine. And when you dehumanize yourself, the problem is it's global now. If that is the new objective and that's appropriate, now it opens the door to dehumanizing others. And then, the longer you stay on that road, sometimes that bleeds into, bleeds outside of work and starts, paid sex, because that's really if we look at really the core of all of this is, the objectification of a woman, or paying a woman to service you in some way, or even courting a woman with the purpose of just using them sexually and then discarding them when you're done. All of that's a dehumanization practice. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, that, the antidote to all of it is just tapping into your own humanity. I really believe that. I think it's one of our strongest desires as a human.
Well, and I think that's why it's so central to wellness, because technically there are no rules. You're right. Everything's kind of a man-made structure. Even, the term recovery or any kind of diagnosis is a man-made cluster of symptoms observed through patterns and time. And so, you can buy into all that because it's useful, but you don't necessarily need to surrender wholly to the ideas that you fit into a box. But then you're left with the idea that, okay, so then who makes the rules? Mm-hmm. And if you are going to make the rules, then you better do so knowing and being very confident that you have, like you said, tapped into your humanity. Because otherwise you're making rules from, say, problematic programming like narcissistic thinking or self-protective thinking, or, grandiosity that just hasn't, come out of you like it was meant to when you were little, or so, there's a lot of ways in which our past, our trauma, the families we were raised in will have us kind of thinking through a certain lens. And the best way to examine that is to make sure you're deeply rooted in your own human dignity and able to, understand the human dignity of others. And this is where we all kind of find common rules, not all of us, I suppose, but most of humanity finds kind of common framework for what is right as far as how it comes to treating people and respecting the rights of others. And so I think it's neat because you're talking about like deconstructing down to like the bare bones and then reconstructing something that you can own for yourself.
What I find when we do this is there is a universal truth. Obviously, we all have kind of our different callings as individuals, but I do agree with you. I think when we strip away anything that was made by man, we have everything in common. I found that time and time again. And so it's a huge emphasis of where I try to get guys to think from a recovery self-mastery standpoint, is because I think if we all get our brains there, I just find it's so much easier. Recovery is such a slog when you're making it robotic, but when it's about self-mastery, I have therapists ask me all the time, Roland, how do you get these outcomes? How do you get these really tough cases to crack? I go, I really don't do that much. I just create an environment that's exciting for them, something they want to be a part of, something that just feels right. And next thing you know, they become a different person. And it's really, I don't know. I don't think I do anything that spectacular. I think I just create an environment where they want to be. And you don't see that a lot in recovery. For a lot of people, it is a burden. It's a nuisance. It's something they can't wait to get out of their life. These guys have the other problem. I think recovery becomes the most exciting part of their life, and they have to fight to care about work. And because they just love. Self-mastery is fun, and it's something that you should look forward to be doing for the rest of your life. Not, to me, I never want to see a day where I'm taking my foot off the gas from becoming more me. It's my favorite thing I do all day. But I want to hit on something before we go away from this topic. just for the listeners. So do a lot of these men exhibit narcissistic traits? Absolutely. And I don't think any of the guys in my groups would deny that, but I just kind of want to shine a little bit of a light on something for everybody listening. There's this really neat book for those interested. It's called The Status Game. And the author is a brilliant author, and it's a really fun, he's got a great voice for those of you who want to listen to it on Audible, but he talks about the role of status, and how it's been arguably the strongest driver forever since humans have existed. Now what status is, just so everybody understands, is it's traits essentially, or possessions or whatever, an image, that our society has essentially latched onto as being an advantageous way of existing. And I would, just as some defense for some of these men who have developed some of these narcissistic traits, I remember when I hear people who talk about narcissism, I read it and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I feel like I've been trained by the professional development and career development world to be narcissistic. Like really, a lot of these traits, as I see them, it's like, I learned a lot. I became narcissistic. I was not. I just used to be very different before capitalism kind of dug its claws into me. But we almost train men to do that because a lot of that comes off as this. They've done stuff. That Status Game book's really interesting to read because he cites a bunch of studies around men who develop these traits. They get ahead. And so again, when we think about humans and how we want to get our needs met, and so we want to fall into a status that we believe increases the statistical likelihood of us being chosen, having doors open, getting appreciated, admired, respected, all these things, invited to certain parties and exclusive things, right? If that's advantageous for someone like you, which I think with high achieving men, their DNA, I think, naturally gravitates towards those positions. Hey, if I have to be that to influence people, then I'm going to go be that. And so I kind of want to speak to, I think kind of changing the script around, yes, is it potentially disruptive and harmful to the relationship and recovery? Sure, I'm not denying that. I'm just trying to both show a little bit of grace for these guys. Like you're not a freak or a weirdo or a narcissist for some of these things that you've latched onto. I think it's more so acknowledging that, hey, you arguably latched onto these for a strategic advantage. And they can interrupt your marriage and also lead you down a bunch of roads that you don't want to lead down. So again, I'm a big supporter of, let's have some grace here as to where these men found themselves, because we look at these guys like monsters, but I really see them as victims, to be honest, Hope. I think the world has told them, get money, get rich, be perfect, and get laid with as many attractive women as possible and make as many men envious of you as you can before your time is up. That's winning. And so, that really promotes this narcissistic, grandiose environment. And I just like to speak to that for everybody to understand. I think a lot of men are duped into this being winning. And so I think they think they're winning at life. And this recovery is really the first news they're hearing. And to be honest, to give them an additional more grace, I think the beginning of recovery is quite hard, because it's like, I know y'all, my wife, my therapist, and they're telling me to change, but it's like I pick up my phone or I turn on the TV and it looks to me like my old way of doing things was spot on with who everybody's idolizing and worshiping. So, it is this little push pull of, we got you people trying to tell me to be this other way, but I got everyone on Instagram telling me that the way I was doing things was actually just fine. So before we get off that topic, I just want to speak to, I think a lot of these maladaptive traits were actually adopted with good intent.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to speak to that. Do you mind me kind of segueing into a few thoughts? So, first of all, the pop psychology understanding of narcissism needs refinement. It is not very clinical. And even the clinical criteria for narcissism, in my estimation, really need refinement as well.
I know. I was just telling you before this, I fell into it. When I hear the clinical and the pop, I'm like, shoot, I fall in. I'm a narcissist by both people's definitions.
Yeah,
but then it's funny. I've had psychiatrists But then I've had psychiatrists tell me, no, Roland, you are absolutely not. So I agree with you to look at it and feel like I fall into it by every measure, but then have somebody who's educated be like, no, Roland, you're not, you have some narcissistic traits that you've developed because of your upbringing, but you're not a narcissist. But so to your point, I just wanted the listeners to hear that is, it can be a little gut punch to have the world label me as such, because it's just not fun. It's not fun having other people tell me what I am.
Well, absolutely. And it's overexpressed in pop psychology and misunderstood. So, the clinical criteria would suggest that entitlement, grandiosity, and, being comfortable to manipulate people for your own benefit is kind of how narcissism functions. But really the theme or the heart of that, in my estimation, could be best explained as narcissism is a lack of being able to understand anything from outside your own view. In other words, having difficulty being in another person's shoes. If you haven't lived that experience, it's hard to understand it or even give it much credence. And that's my take on like a true narcissist. They're meeting criteria because they really can't see outside their own frame. Mm-hmm. And that's what, causes empathy to be troublesome for them. They can kind of perform empathy, but maybe not really understand what it might be like to walk, or why someone might have an opposite view or something like that. But what I do believe is that all the men that I've worked with over the past decade, they, all show up with various forms of entitlement. Mm-hmm. And you can't extract entitlement from secret sexual behavior. Mm-hmm. It's one thing if somebody's single and they're using porn or, commercial sex or something like that. That may go against their morals. It may go against the norms of society. It may be problematic or unhealthy for them. But if it's not violating the fidelity code of a relationship, then the consequences are different for somebody who's single. When somebody is in a committed relationship, they're partnered with somebody or married to somebody, and they're secretly violating fidelity, you can't do that. You can't keep that a secret without entitlement. Entitlement, in my opinion, is not grandiosity where I think I'm better than others. It's more a fear of being squashed, having masculinity be reduced if I'm not treated a certain way or given a certain type of respect. If I can't manage the perceptions of people around me and maintain a certain look, then I'm less than. And so I teach men about, anchoring in a stable sense of dignity, because when you do that, you can anchor others in their stable sense of dignity. Nobody's better than the other. And the idea is that you can have actual empathy for both others, but also for yourself. You don't have to keep trying to prove things. Even if you're being mistreated, you can know that within yourself, you have worth, value, dignity that can't be squashed, no matter how well someone likes you or just disapproves. And so in that effort, this is where men can become radically generous with their partners who are very angry with them. Because even if they are being disrespected or treated in a manner that feels like, very hurtful, the truth is they can say, this doesn't reduce my dignity. My dignity is immutable. And that doesn't mean because I'm worth something that I don't deserve to be treated well. But if in this moment I'm not being, I don't need deservedness to steer my ship here. I'm not going to act out of entitlement. I'm going to say, hey, regardless of what I deserve, I have dignity, which enables me to make a powerful choice to be generous, to be benevolent, to show up in a way that may be very sacrificial. And it's all for the good of an altruistic outcome, the best interest of my partner and me in our relationship. And so I look at entitlement differently. I separate it from narcissism in the sense that it's not about being too fragile or being too grandiose, like you really think you're better than others. If those flavors are there, maybe somebody does have some narcissism on board. But really, a lot of the men I work with have some level of kind of giftedness. They're really good at doing certain things. And those strengths, kind of have another end of the spectrum too. They become weaknesses in certain relational contexts. But you're right. The things that bring success oftentimes don't work well relationally, right? So it's not like you have to offload all your skills in order to be a healthy person, but channeling them toward what really matters can be, a huge win and can feel like maturity and can feel like a masculinity that's like really strong. And so I really feel strongly about helping men access the strength they have inside of them. I think most men need to be challenged to the level of their strength and may not know how deep it really is. I believe that men have everything they really need inside of them to actualize empathy and integrity, even if they didn't have a good template for that growing up. I believe in their dignity, and that's what I help them access so that they can like see what they're capable of.
Yeah, no, what I hear there, because you see this a lot. If these men feel at all like you are going to make it harder for them to get their needs met, which recovery can do this. I have seen, we have to be sensitive to where the driven, successful male's mindset is. They genuinely, their worth is in the influence, the accomplishments, and that's where they find all of their worth, right? So it's this. To me, I always tell everybody, we just have to honor where we are in 2025 as a capitalistic, materialistic society. I think there's a lot of good behind a lot of their bad. The intent was not to be a bad person. I mean, these guys, every week, I have 60 guys and I have 6 different groups of 10 guys. Every week, somebody's crying. Somebody's crying about how far off track they unknowingly got. And my point of that is, I don't have anyone in this program who does not feel horrible at what they have done and wants to undo all of it. They want to undo every little bit of it. And so to me, I don't know. I mean, how narcissistic are they if they're literally doing everything in their power to gain some redemption and undo the harm that they've caused others? I don't know. To me, these men have plenty of empathy and plenty of goodness in their hearts. And it really saddens me to see them be accused of being unempathetic and being called narcissists. It's just, I don't think that's accurate. They might not be good at doing empathy in the way that you want them to, and they might have some narcissistic tendencies that they don't want to release because they've found value in them in business. But to me, to call them some of those things it's causing more harm than good. And the other thing that I heard you...
Can I challenge you on that?
Please, yeah.
Here's what I'd say. In the groups of men that I have, we often talk about how they wish their wives could be a fly on the wall because they would see something, not just in their own husband who's attending the group, but in the collective whole of this all-star mentality, where they are doing the work, they are holding each other's feet to the fire, they're calling themselves forward, they're taking initiative, they're doing mental and emotional labor, they're engaging with intimacy, and they have a desire to do better, to be good men. And then the meeting closes, the laptop closes.
Oh, I already know where you're going now. I know where you're going.
Well, and the idea is that that doesn't translate. What the work that they're doing doesn't necessarily translate in the context of a difficult moment where they do withdraw or they're still struggling to listen with their full attention. And the truth is they've given their wives years worth, if not decades worth of history to prove that they will not do the right thing when pressed, that they will choose the selfish avenue. And so their wives have really good reason to operate from a negative perspective. And any trace of that old programming gets called out because it's not safe. It's indicative of more acting out coming down the pike. So, the truth is like in those groups, narcissism may be the farthest. There's not a shred of it, right? But at home, how much progress they're making. Their wife's complaints are still valid and worth listening to, even when they don't make sense. And usually when they don't make sense, it's because I believe that they've got some blockages going on that are unseen, unknown, because they're so very old. Like you said earlier, this stuff isn't like, hey, I'm going to wake up one day and choose narcissism. Right. I'd like to wake up and be, a total a-hole, forever and really ruin relationships. It's more a slow onboarding of self-protective measures that often come from really sad stories, particularly neglect stories, not always outright abuse where there was a black eye or a bruise to show for it. Sometimes we're talking about things that just didn't happen enough. And it's so hard to pinpoint those chasms in one's development because you don't know what you don't know, right? So you don't know what you missed. And you just go about life trying to fill empty voids sometimes, make up for what you weren't taught. And that's where a lot of these, I call them the dire traits, detachment, incongruence, regression, and entitlement. That's, I think, where they begin to onboard. And they are useful. They're useful in helping one function. They're useful in helping somebody not feel squashed or demeaned or less important. But at the same time, they outlive their value.
Yeah, you what you said there is here's how I articulate it is, most of the guys in my program, their biggest pathology or weakness or vulnerability is they really dislike any situation or person that validates a story about them that they do not like. And so I think that is how I see it with the wife is here. It's, I'm so proud of you. Here it's, gosh, you've changed so much in just 3 months since you've been in the program. Here, they come out to the retreat and it is just attention. They're being validated in a way that they've really longed for, especially in this. These groups, a lot of this is like a level of connection and brotherhood that these guys have just never had, right? And then to your point, I go home and my worst nightmare is happening. I am being accused of things that I've never done. I am being called things that I never dreamt that my life partner would call me. It is from somebody who really fights hard to have nice things said about me. My home is my worst nightmare. It is the place where I feel the worst about myself. Right. And so to your point, we're getting a lot of these partners are getting a very different version outside of group. And I appreciate you bringing that up. The other thing too, that I was thinking of was on that same token, what I have found, I'll make it about me. I won't project this onto other guys because I actually don't know if this is true for other guys, but I suspect it is. You know what I've learned, and this is a really painful thing to admit. I really hate saying this out loud because it's just sad. It's just a sad thing to say, but it's true. So I'm going to say it. You know what I realized, Hope? I have this story of I have a hard time connecting with other men, right? 12-step programs were just so hard for me. Sometimes when I was in a really awesome city and there was a bunch of other high achieving men there, then it would be awesome. But if there weren't, I had a really hard time. But you know what I realized? And again, this is so sad. As my therapists were digging into my difficulties with connection, they asked, well, give me some ideas. Roland, tell me when you feel the most connected. And this is when I discovered that this really sad moment. I was confusing connection, Hope, with people who drink my Kool-Aid. That's what I thought connection was. And so I loved hanging around other entrepreneurs, driven dudes, because they're like, oh yeah, they see my wristwatch or they see the projects I'm working on, and they're falling for my spells. I'm casting impressive spells on them, and it's working. Mm-hmm. Whereas when I go and cast a spell on someone and they don't know what a Patek Aquanaut is, they don't know that that's $100,000 watch, and I cast my spell on them and they don't buy it, I interpreted that as, I don't connect with you. And so it's really sad for me to admit that, but my whole life, so much of the connection that I thought, now it explains why I had no connection, because I really did. Now that I know what connection is, I really wonder how much of it I've ever had, It's really sad. So I just wanted to
insight. Can I reflect on that?
I think a lot of men who buy into successful male culture, I think they are caught up a little bit in that their definition of a good day is when I cast my spells that I have perfected. And here's the thing, I hold my spell, my little spell bag. I cherish that thing because I was a nobody. Hope, before I had that spell bag, I was a nobody. I got bullied. I could not get the women that I wanted. I was shy. I was timid. I lacked confidence. People never saw me how I saw myself. I hated myself. Then I got my spells and I learned how to do them, and I got better at casting better spells on people to the point where I almost didn't have a spell that would work on almost everyone. I mean, I got that good at casting spells on others. And it's just really sad because I was confused that was connection. And now I'm having to learn about this new level of connecting with people. And what I've realized, and this is really sad to admit, is I can actually connect with anyone, even if we're very different. And I'm sad about that. I've just lived a very alone life under this delusion that I was actually connecting. But here's the last thing I want to say on that, and I'm curious to get your take on it. Here's what I've realized about spell casting, Hope. I know it's a spell. And so even though they were saying everything that I've ever wanted to hear, they were looking at me at ways that the little boy in me I wanted people to look at me in that way so badly. It was all I ever wanted. But you know what I realized is when you know it's a spell, their compliment doesn't mean shit because they're complimenting my spell, not me. And I never knew. And it's those two things. It's the lack of connection and the fact that I was just bullshitting everyone, trying so desperately to get those things to be said about me. And then I finally got it and it never worked. And then I tried again in a bigger way because I'm like, oh, maybe it just wasn't enough. Maybe I need to get on a bigger stage. And then I would do it up there and it wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. And then I would, I need it. Maybe more successful men would say that. And then maybe that'll do it. I'll get billionaires to say that about me. So then I got them to say it about me. Didn't work. And that was when I realized if you want to be seen, you have to show them you. And it's a tough topic for me to mention because it explains a lot of my isolation and sadness for so many decades.
Yeah. I'm grateful you would share that with me, with your audience too. I talk about incongruence in my program, which you've just so beautifully articulated, the pain points of it, particularly, living in one way in front of the camera and a different way behind closed doors. And all of it involves force. It involves a effort and exertion to help people see your value. It's interesting because what you said was, before I had my bag of spells, I was a nobody. But I would say, to play that tape all the way through, I was a nobody according to culture's definition.
Yes, correct.
Right? And now your definition in recovery and with so much healing work on board, wouldn't your definition of who you used to be that you were just good enough?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. It's the person. It's, the irony is when I show people that, two things happens. One, they love it more than the performance. And two, the compliment when I get one, or I don't even need a compliment. The funny thing is just showing them me. I was just at like a psychodrama event the other day. I live in Sedona, so there's all sorts of like crazy weird shit going on here all the time. So I was at this like psychodrama event the other night and I was just in tears. And it was just, we stayed for like an hour and a half past the event because there was just this, I'm hanging out with, some of the ladies are like 70-year-old, but I mean, it was just this beautiful thing that was occurring. And again, I don't know if anyone actually even ever complimented me or said anything. It didn't matter though. The way they looked at me, spellless, free of spells. It's just a feeling that I've really longed for. And I want to point out, I'm scared of it too, because I don't know what it is yet. So to have somebody to get that feeling, it makes me want to go back to spell casting. I actually don't, I'm still uncomfortable with being equal. I don't like that. I like being better than everyone. And I like everyone knowing that I am better than them. And that's just a comfortable place that I've rested for a long time.
That's a great insight to have, an important one. But, the challenge then is to channel the energy into casting spells into something that allows you to tolerate equity. Equality, and when we tolerate it, then the gateway opens up for like that real connection, which I know you're already experiencing. I'm not trying to teach you something that I think you aren't already learning, but I just love how you're putting words to that. It is so painful to think that all the connection we've had may have been rooted in like-mindedness or us convincing people that we matter, right? When ultimately, there's just such a beautiful rawness that really has yet to emerge for most of the men I work with anyway. And, have you ever heard of that hero's journey?
Yeah.
And what I love most about it, Roland, is that like it's this guy who starts off just kind of a normal guy, right? And then he goes through battles, and then he fights temptation, and then he fights a bigger demon, and then the biggest demon yet, and he's about to die, and there's a helper who comes, and finally he returns to normal, back, where he used to be, as far as where he lives, what he used to look like. He's just the same guy, but not. Inside, he's different. He's like transcendent. And I think that there's so much truth in that, and the purpose of life to we can't break shape. Like, we're not shapeshifters. We spend all this time working to do that. And then like we return to like our original embodiment, our original program. And we're like, wow, this was fine all along. It was precious. It was dignified. It was worth investing in. It was talented and skilled, but it was also caring. And it didn't have to protect itself as much as maybe, well, it might have had to protect itself, but at some point it needed to lay down some of those protections in order to let people in, and so we kind of refurbish ourselves, and we become kind of like babies again, like who we were meant to be. Yeah. I see you doing that. I think that's so awesome.
There's so much peace though in knowing nothing. And it's funny because we're all terrified. One of my shamans I worked with back in 2015, he said it. He goes, Roland, life is a sequence of becoming somebody, and then we become a somebody and we're like, I'm not this, and then we become a nobody, but then we don't want to be a nobody, and then so we become a somebody again, and then we are like, well, this isn't me, and then we become a nobody. And he goes, Roland, you're just going to do that forever. And he goes, the cool thing is that it kind of gets closer and closer to the asymptote as you go. And, you start spending more time being you. And I'll never forget when he explained that, but that is absolutely how it's come. You just go through these, this is who I am. And then you find out it's not who you are. And then you try again, and it's like, no, I'm somebody like this. And, but I think that's just the journey of life, is doing your best to become you, knowing that it's really hard, and you can always get closer. It's kind of like golf. Until you're getting a hole in one off the tee, off every hole, you can always get closer. And I think that's why self-mastery can be so fun. That's why I like to focus on that instead of recovery. And the thing that I would mention too, for everybody listening to this, the easiest way, is the reason I formulated my groups, is the easiest way for you to start to be okay with being equal, learn about what connection is. It really is. The easiest way is to start with like-minded people. That's why I structured my groups for high achievers, and is sometimes the leap between here and there is too big. It's just too big. You need to be around a bunch of other people who have a similar pathology and are afraid of the same thing. And you guys can connect in that place, and then get to a place where soon you guys can work together to, hey, it's okay to be equal. It's okay to, these things are good for us. I would argue, as long as you're trying to be better than others, I think you'll struggle in your sobriety and recovery as well. I think it's very unhuman to do such a thing. So Hope, last question. If guys are going to reach out to you, where are they? Like, how do they know that your program's a good fit? And then after that, how do they find it?
Okay, sure. Well, the men that are best candidates for my program, it's called Getting Dire Straight. Those men are in advanced recovery, meaning they have some sobriety under their belt. If they use that term sobriety, it's a common way to say I'm abstaining from fidelity violating behaviors. They're also partnered to someone, and they're trying to make it work. If they're in the midst of a separation, but they're hoping to, rejoin in marriage or commitment, they can be good candidates. But they're advanced in the sense that they are running into walls, aware of their partner's complaints, but not really sure how to actualize change. They do have effort. They do have energy to give. They aren't, they're open to being challenged, So those are the guys that I just feel, I feel deep passion to walk alongside and help them find each other. And so they can find my website is hoperay.com.
Yeah. Awesome. I love that. Hope, this was so fun. We're gonna have to do it again. Chris introduced me to you. I was describing, and he said, I look up to her so much. And it didn't disappoint. I see why he wanted us to connect. Just deep thinkers, strategic, fun ways of kind of recovery is not a copy and paste black and white process. So I think, coming and calling out the fact that it needs to be customized and that the person who needs to customize it is the person in recovery. I believe in that so much, and so do you. So I think it's a cool topic today.
Yeah.
I love this so much.
Well, I just want to thank you for living out loud. That might be a cheesy thing to say, but like asking the big questions before maybe even you have the answers. That's a really neat part of the leadership I see you staking out in this area. And I think it's meaningful to others and probably resonates deeply with people who are asking those big questions that a lot of people are afraid to do. So I'll give you credit for it.
Thank you, Hope. I appreciate that. Yeah. Until next time.